Looking back at 90s video games, they haven't always aged the best. We all scoff at the graphics now and call the gameplay weak, but at the time, this was considered some pretty hard-hitting stuff. Well, I won't lie. Some of it is genuine hot garbage. Video games from that time were very experimental, and people really kind of were throwing any idea at the wall. One of those was FMV games. With games being put on CDs for the first time, developers had options for a lot more storage than cartridges. And so some developers came up with the idea to use full-motion video for their games. Most notably today, Kenji Eno of Warp. He created in 1995 the legendary FMV game D. Originally released on the 3DO and later ported to the Sega Saturn and Sony PlayStation, it will be today's video subject. Just a quick disclaimer, there will be some spoilers, so I highly recommend you actually go play this game before you watch this review. D is a point-and-click adventure game using full-motion video, kind of similar to something like Mansion of Hidden Souls or Seventh Guest. Only this is a lot shorter, and the puzzles are a lot easier. The narrative is what's most important in the game. It's essentially a movie, and is set up as such, with most of the puzzles taking very minimal effort and either revolve around timed button pressing, or just memorizing something that's pretty much thrown at you. You have a mirror, which you can use 3 times throughout the game to get a hint as to what you're supposed to do, and a clock that tells the time. This is because this game has a timer limit. You have to beat the entire game in 2 hours. Now that might sound daunting, and it definitely was for my first playthrough, but after you figure out all the puzzles and get through the game, going back and revisiting it becomes a whole lot easier. That brings me to my next point, which is the game has a lot of replay value due to the fact that you have to find 3 beetles throughout the game. Once you find all 3, you have unlocked the true ending. I won't spoil it here. It isn't anything that great. You just get a little teaser for a game that never existed. But that's for another time. Moving on to the story, it revolves around Laura Harris, who is attending university when she receives a phone call from the police informing her that her father has gone on a murderous rampage at the hospital he works at, murdering several people. Laura has been tasked to go into the hospital and try and negotiate with her father and figure out what has happened. And along the way, Laura discovers a few secrets of her own. Upon entering the hospital, she is immediately teleported to a Romanian castle and is haunted by her father, who is telling her repeatedly to leave.
Laura. Laura. Soon I will be transformed. When that happens, my new self will have need of you. This other self is one I cannot control. It is he who has done these horrible things. Laura, leave here. He wants you.
In addition, when you find the beetles that were aforementioned earlier, they reveal flashbacks to Laura eating her mother, revealing a sinister family origin tracing back to Dracula. Laura's father then, at the end of the game, asks Laura to lend him her blood so that he can complete his transformation. It is at this point you're given a choice. You can either take out the gun that you have collected and shoot him and get the good ending, or you're allowed to let him consume your flesh, and you get the bad ending. It's really up to you, but either way, there isn't really much of a difference. If you collect all the beetles, you get a trailer for the next game, and that's it. Now, what do I think of it? I think that D is an interesting experience. Its strange avant-garde approach is definitely not everybody's piece of cake. but I have a strange love for this game. Its atmosphere is dark and brooding. The graphics might be kind of awful at some spots, but it has its charm. Laura has a lot of emotions. She expresses them deeply, and even though it can look a little silly, I'd argue that it has its own charm and gives the game its own personality. If you are very impatient as a gamer, I do not recommend D at all. But if you're willing to sit down and relax for a good hour or so and sit through the puzzles, this is the game for you. To me, D seems like a project made by the developers as they were trying to formulate how to make an adventure game. And they figured it out along the way, with puzzles becoming increasingly more complex, and the scenery becoming more complex as you go along. What this creates is a game that has a lot of personality, but is slogged down by its own game mechanics at times. The second disc I often find incredibly painful to sit through, because of the circular room with the wheel especially. I often find myself circling through several times to get to the room I need, and then accidentally passing by it because I mistook it for another room. It takes up nearly half of the game just sitting in this room, spinning the wheel, trying to get to the right room you need to find so that you can progress to the next part of the game. In one of these rooms, there's a hall of knight armor, and you have to fight one of the knights that have come to life in a weird quick-time event situation. It never happens again throughout the rest of the game and is really disorienting and off-putting to me. I always end up having to do it 5-6 times because I'm never able to hit the buttons right. But luckily, once you've figured out where to go throughout the game, it's completely skippable. Other than that, I don't have too much other things too negative to say about the game. It isn't overly long, and as I've said, once you've figured out where you need to go, it takes about 30 minutes max to beat the game. It isn't hard. Really, the challenge comes in finding the beetles. Sometimes they do spawn, sometimes they don't. That's what keeps you coming back for the game. Now for the official scoring of the game. I came up with the idea to grade my games based on how good they are, based on 5 different criteria: graphics, sound, controls, story, and fun factor. And I'll be giving them a score out of 5. For the graphics, I will give D a 3 out of 5. While they haven't aged the best, they have their own charm and uniqueness to them that helps elevate the experience. And honestly, I wouldn't have it any other way. This type of 90s FMV cheese has cemented its place in horror forever, similar to 80s slasher films. The sound I have to give a 5 out of 5. Kenji Eno's music is outstandingly beautiful, and the dark ambient tracks that play throughout the actual game definitely add a level of eeriness to it that I felt elevated the experience. Controls I will give a 2 out of 5. They work just as fine as you think they would, but the game definitely hesitates when I press inputs a little too much for my liking. And -1 point just for that damn QuickTime event. I hated it so much. Story I will give a 4 out of 5. Albeit a bit incoherent, the story kept me on the edge of my seat and is one of the driving factors that keeps me coming back to the game, and why I'm a big fan of the game in general. The fun factor I will give a 2.5 out of 5. It definitely has its moments, but it can be pretty slow, and if you're an impatient gamer, it's not for you. This brings our total to 16.5. Or in a total percentage, 66. If you're collecting for any of the 3 systems it's on, I highly recommend picking it up. PlayStation copies can be dubious and expensive, and 3DO copies can be legendarily expensive and rare. But surprisingly, you can find it for the Sega Saturn fairly often. It works perfectly good on most emulators I've tried out as well. Just make sure you can configure it to work with multiple discs. There's also a lost DOS version if I'm correct, and a Windows version. You can also get it on Steam now if you just want to do a modern platform. In terms of which version is best, they're all pretty much the same across the board. The Sega Saturn version is unique in the fact that it only came on 2 discs compared to the other version's 3. This also comes with some compromises made to the graphics, with the Saturn version being comparably more pixely and dark compared to the PlayStation and 3DO versions. But gameplay is identical. Now, other than that, that just about wraps up the review, and I just wanted to say thank you guys for sitting through this and bearing with me. This is my first time in a long time doing a YouTube video, and my first time doing anything like this. So I'm still figuring this out as I go along. If anybody has some review suggestions for me, please drop them in the comments below. And with that, I will catch you guys next time. Thank you much.